Hello, BMCers. Thank you so much for joining us for our diversity speaker series. July is for Allies edition. I am so excited to introduce to you all, if you have not heard from her before, she is a previous speaker, Giselle Mota. Giselle Mota is the founder of NFTY Collective, which she's going to talk about, which is all about inclusion and extended realities. She's also the vice president of product inclusion at ADP. And she happens to be an incredible colleague, friend, and someone I admire very, very much. And she's going to tell us today all about what we can do to make it a more inclusive and be better allies in extended realities. Here at BMC Software, we are a technology company, and tech for good is something that we have a lot of rigor around, specifically in our corporate social responsibility, from web accessibility to low coding our products so they're not giving off as many a message during the run times when our clients are using them. And this is just another piece of how we can leverage technology to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals and make this world a more better and inclusive and sustainable place. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Giselle. Giselle, thank you so much for being here today. Can you tell us a little bit more about you and then kick off all the things about NFTY Collective?
I'd love to. By the way, the feeling is mutual. I so respect and admire your work and the impact that you have on BMC and so many others. So thank you for all that you do, Wendy. So yeah, you heard it all here. My name is Giselle Mota. I am really focused on trying to bring inclusion into the world of evolving technologies. And what really led me into this project was seeing how things such as artificial intelligence has already existed. It keeps on expanding. Virtual reality, augmented reality, all these things have already existed. But when you put them all together, thus enters this new world of Web3 and so this next iteration of the use of the internet and Metaverse. And when I started to see how this was like expanding and moving, but leaving behind certain groups of people that really couldn't enjoy it, access it, get education and awareness on it, I'm like, so I got to do something. And so those people that I found were being left behind were people with disabilities. And, I myself, I have a neurodivergence. I'm like a lot of people nowadays are realizing that you may be on the spectrum. I have dyslexia. So maybe a lot of you out there as well are my fellow dyslexic people who are brilliant minds, right? I must say, with the bias that I have to say of myself. But, there's ways of thinking and approaching things, whether you have a chronic illness, whether you have a neurodivergence, whether you have a physical or an unseen disability, you bring something to the table, and our users of our technologies bring something unique to the table as far as perspective. We cannot leave them behind. And so if we want to really move forward with inclusive technology, we have to think of people with disabilities as well. So that's how this project came to be. And so I'd love to tell you more about it. I love
that this is like a side project. You were just like, you know what I'm going to do on top of my full-time job? I'm going to change the world in the metaverse. Thank you.
No sleep. Team no sleep. No, I'm kidding. No, but you know what, Wendy? Like, it was something that during the pandemic and everything that was happening with like racial and social unrest, I was like, what am I doing with my time? And I took a step back, and at that time, I was actually the principal consultant for the future of work. So I talked about all these amazing concepts of artificial intelligence, data analytics, automation, all of that. But I was just really, at the end of the day, helping organizations be more efficient, streamline, be more predictive, get smarter with how they do their processes. Great. But am I helping change the world in any way? Like, am I really helping be impactful? Am I helping make a difference? And honestly, I was like, I'm not. And I want to. So I want to focus on, and this was birthed. It was birthed out of rebellion, out of angst, but also out of love and out of passion. So all of that energy came together, and here we are.
Love that purpose.
All right. So I will tell you all more about this collective. So what you're seeing on the screen right now, these are real people who have disabilities from around the world. So what we set out to do was find, and from like left to right, I'll just show you kind of what you're seeing on the screen. We have an individual who's a rapper, and if for any reason, if you can't see, I'm going to kind of describe what is on the screen. So we have an individual in a wheelchair. He is from Singapore. He has a beanie hat on and a kind of orange jacket, very urban look, and he's in a wheelchair. if you notice, his arms, his hands, his limbs are quite thin. We wanted to display that in his avatar form. He, again, is a rapper, well known. He's done some great concerts. He was actually at an event recently with Katy Perry out there in Asia Pacific. He was doing great things. And he's a producer as well as an athlete, believe it or not. So he's out here doing Paralympian things, and he's on like this awesome team that he plays in Singapore. And we wanted to highlight his character, and what you see next to him is his NFTY Collective version of his character, wearing a beanie, sunglasses, showcases his goatee. He actually often wears like, you know, skinny jeans that show like the rip out where you could see his knees. But we wanted to keep true to showing that his hands are quite inverted into themselves because he has muscular dystrophy, and it's actually progressing. So little by little, his limbs are getting thinner. His muscular skeletal kind of, you know, system is kind of breaking down in that way. And you know what? We want to reflect that he's awesome. He's so cool. We want to reflect that in his avatar as well, but being true to his disability. In the middle, we have Aubrey Blanche. Aubrey Blanche is kind of sometimes based in Australia, but also in the United States. I think she's been moving, or actually they, because I believe that they're non-binary individual. And we wanted to show their pink hair, their piercings. You know, we have glasses that have these markings on them, on their avatar, because they are bipolar, and this is something that you cannot see. So we wanted to reflect that somehow in a marker in their character avatar that shows that. And on the far right-hand side, we have Isaac Harvey, who's based in the UK, an influencer and a filmmaker. Isaac Harvey was born with hypoplasia, which means he was born without arms, and his legs are not developed. He does have sort of some, you know, formation of feet, and his feet are also kind of inverted. And so we wanted to show that in his character. All of these characters show up as urban in the way that we kind of represent them. We wanted them to look cool because they're doing amazing things in the world. And we didn't want to hide their disability because they don't want to hide it. They want this choice to be able to be seen as they are. And so that's what you're seeing on the screen right now.
It's such a powerful, like, representation matters, and to be able to show up as yourself and have these options. I remember like when emojis came out and they weren't reflective as much as they could be to like demonstrate
Right.
other people. And I think it's just it is so powerful for people to be able to have these options, show up however they want in, you know, extended reality, but have the option to show up as who they want.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And like what you're also seeing now with the celebration of Disability Pride Month for July, you're seeing these different characters and kind of what they had to say. A minute ago, you saw, and I'll show you some, we have people who are like partially sighted. We have someone who has like a limb difference. We have someone who's a little person who has dwarfism, and they get around on their mobility device, which is kind of like this Segway scooter. And we show that in their avatar, which you're seeing on the screen. They're waving. And so what you see right now on the far left-hand side, and we'll get into the more detail here, we have an actual metaverse environment where someone can go in and view like art gallery. They can interact with their avatar, move around, and learn about our characters more in that space, in spatial. And so this is kind of a metaverse space where you can interact with our characters. In the middle, we were invited to Viva Tech in Paris. We were actually represented again this year. And when people went up to the signage, they were able to take out their phone or mobile device, scan it, and see the augmented reality version of our characters there. We were like the only representation of people with disabilities at such a huge event that like Mark Zuckerberg has spoken at before, you know, Bill Gates, many people from like top technology platforms go to Viva Tech every year, and they speak and they do things. And what a pleasure and a privilege to be able to represent people with disabilities, emerging technology, and have people take selfies and pictures like with our characters there. And then what you saw waving a moment ago is Brandon Farbstein. He is a little person with dwarfism, and he speaks. He's a global figure, and he's a wonderful speaker and an author. And we have him represented there in his augmented reality version, where you can actually see him pop up in your living room. You can take a picture with him. You can do different things. And that's how we're like, Wendy, we didn't only want to like create these avatars and be like, oh, cool, there's an avatar on a wheelchair, or, you know, we wanted to mobilize these things and use them in emerging technology. So yes, we're gonna have them show up in virtual reality, augmented reality, metaverse spaces, games, like you name it, we're mobilizing these characters because why not?
Well,
So
yeah, I was
that's
going to
about it.
ask, and I think you're about to go into this, but for like the audience, talking about like what Web3 is, what Metaverse is, you do such a great job of articulating that because it seems like a very esoteric concept, but it's not. It is
Yeah.
very real and happening all around us. And some people might not even realize that they participate in extended reality to some extent. And then on top of
Yeah.
that, can you tell us why it's so important for people that might have like disabilities or not have access to the world and how they're using these tools?
Sure, absolutely. Love it. And you know, I will say that these are not new concepts at all. It's just kind of like a new flavor, if you would. It's like if all these ingredients already existed and then you made like this amazing sundae with all these parts. So you had vanilla ice cream already, you had cherries, you had sprinkles, and you brought all this together. And that's what the metaverse is today and what Web3 is. It's a gathering of features that like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality. And when you put all of this together, you come into these spaces. I will also say during the pandemic, if people out there in the audience remember, a lot of us were at home. We couldn't engage in like in-person activities. So what did people flock to? Engaging experiences that they can do from like their home. And so that's where you saw this proliferation of like virtual reality and headsets were being sold and people were like at home. I did it too. I saw a comedy show in virtual reality with goggles on and I was like looking around on the stage and I was like looking around at people seated at tables in this comedy club and it was so cool. And so that is something that people are doing. Also, if you remember, movie studios were making movies without having to like be out in the field and have a bunch of people gathered together. They were using green screens. They were using haptic devices where you would put like something on your fingers to sense when you move your hands or on your head. And they would use these like these suits. That technology has existed for a long time. That's the basis of technology that then uses like avatars where you can mobilize and like have a skeleton figure move around, and then you can have these, we use it all the time too when we animate our characters and our avatars. So this stuff has existed already. And by the way, children were already creating before we used like Web3, and I'll get into these definitions in just a second. Like kids were already creating worlds and like using currency, digital currency to be able to like buy little parts of their games and stuff. So I think that kids and movies and gaming have been way ahead of us. Now we're finding out about all these things and big companies are leaning into it. So let's define it, like you said. So what is the metaverse? What are all these terms? I'm glad you asked. Let's get into it. So blockchain is the basis of how a lot of this works. Blockchain is basically what I call a decentralized system of truth, which means like before, if you think of a middle person would be like, if you want to buy something, you have to go through your bank. Your bank kind of processes your data and your information, and then it sends it to the merchant, and the merchant is able to like get you your transaction. That middle person no longer has to exist when you have blockchain. Blockchain is the way in which transactions happen, where I can sell something online, or I can like trade my picture or a video that I upload, and it will say, Giselle was the original owner of that asset. And so she does not need a middle person to conduct that transaction. The truth will always go back to the center of truth is her. She owns that. It is her resume. It is her qualifications. She owns an asset, and it always goes back because blockchain assigns like a series of block numbers to you, and it'll say that you indeed were the original owner of that asset. And I say that because Web3 works on like blockchain and those kind of transactions. So I'll share that with you in a moment as well. So Web 1 is how we used to use the internet at the very beginning. Remember, like, you've got mail and like the dial up, like all that. Like that was Web 1, where we used like basic internet and HTML was a thing, and e-commerce and eBay and all that stuff. We thought we were like on something, right? We were like, wow, we're so innovative, and we were at the time. So then we moved into Web 2, which most of us know about Web 2. you're using like Web2 right now on this virtual call where we get it on a camera. You're able to like talk to people back and forth, and then there's like high-speed communication and all that good stuff. The problem with Web2 versus where we're trying to get to and where we've already moved with Web3, when you upload an image to like Instagram, when you upload a video to YouTube, that party, remember there's a middle person there. They own your data, they own your assets, they can monetize off of it, and they do. Web3 is a chance for people to say, you know what, because of blockchain, I'm the original owner of this asset. And so I can monetize my data. I can get on virtual reality and augmented reality in the metaverse. I can use artificial intelligence and be able to do all these things that we're talking about today and that you've heard of. That's Web3. It is the decentralization of this next iteration of how we use the internet. And so that's where we are today. We're at Web3. We're in this place that is, moving by blockchain. So that brings us to like NFTs. I'm sure you've heard of non-fungible tokens. And there are many use cases in which people have used these things. This is like a digital asset that you own. And remember, it's moved by like blockchain, it's moved by digital currencies like Ethereum, you've probably heard of. You've probably heard of like all these different ways to like, trade without having to use physical like money to do so. And I will tell you that everything from real estate to fashion to music, people have been going to creating like digital assets, and sometimes they merge it with physical assets. I'll give you a quick example. So like Nike has been able to create these like digital versions of sneakers or tennis shoes, depending on where you're listening to be from, and you call it whatever you call it. But they've been using these digital versions of like sneakers. And then they design it, they come up with these amazing like 3D designs, you're able to customize them. And when they want to kind of engage with that user even more, they can then ship that person the physical asset that they created and they own as their NFT. So they own like a digital version of the sneaker that not everybody owns. Then somebody will custom make it and actually drop ship it to that person, and they can have that unique sneaker. Now, with NFTs, people with disabilities, because I just want to bring this back to that conversation, people with disabilities are creating art, music, all types of assets, and they're uploading it and being able to participate in this like digital economy where before someone with autism wouldn't be employed, let's say at somebody's, workplace, and now they're creating art. I know I have a friend who like some of the art that's being created, they use it in their physical designs to create patterns on fabric that then they sell in their fashion line. And that's amazing. Like people of all different types of disabilities don't have to necessarily like leave home if they don't want to or if they can't. And they can use their creativity and they can create all these assets and make money off of it. They can get employed. They can do amazing things working for themselves in many cases and maybe in partnership with others. And that's like agency and autonomy that's being brought because of NFTs, because of, this world that we're talking about.
So just to repeat back what you're saying, leveraging these technologies in the disability community is giving the opportunity to advance economic empowerment, participating in the markets, and to put out their representation that might not have existed before, which are all good things,
right,
for everyone.
That's right. And it's awesome. And so I can get into a whole spiel about NFTs and what they mean. And there's been a lot of like movement around this because some people were like doing ridiculous things at the beginning and selling like a cat for like millions of dollars, a cat that spits fire out of its mouth. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about use cases in which you could use it for good. You can make a change, right? And so this is that world. The metaverse is this space in which like basically everything you could do in the physical world, imagine if you could do it in a virtual world. And think about like, again, I said going to a comedy show. You could do it in a digital space. Onboarding. Accenture is a company who now they onboard all of their new employees. They get an avatar assigned to them. They get into this virtual space. So you may be starting off with Accenture in China, and you may be sitting with, a coworker who sits in Australia and in the States. And then all of you come together and you meet each other and sometimes work with each other in this digital space of a metaverse that they've created. So that happens. And some other use cases I wanted to show you on here. is basically like how our organization's using this. And this might be interesting to some of our audience members. So check out these brands from Disney, Chipotle, Adidas, NASCAR. All of these groups have come up with concepts in the metaverse. By the way, the metaverse is expected to be a multi-billion-dollar industry by about 2 years from now. 2025 has been expected to truly grow. And you might say, well, how? Well, what it was. Look at these use cases on the left-hand side of the screen. Barbados was the first government to come up with a way to use the metaverse in their government agency. They created an embassy in this virtual space where people could get their questions answered and kind of learn about the Caribbean and Barbados inside of the digital space. Keep on going down. One of the funniest ones to me was Subway restaurants. They actually had an individual who was creating like virtual subs, and you can go into this space, you can order your virtual sub, and they were paying this person in digital currency to act like a real person behind the scenes to work on these things. But it is the truth. And so if you keep on thinking about this, everyone from banks to UPS to many brands, especially fashion, have leaned into these digital ways to engage their audiences. And this is not going away. The pandemic spurred it because we couldn't engage physically. And it opened the door and opportunities for people to be seen like, okay, if you're going to have an avatar, have it diverse. You may be, a person with a disability, so show up in that way. If you want to engage, and you can't kind of get to a physical space easily, you can engage in our digital space. And there's no limitations or ramps or things that you need to use in that way. So all of this comes to play in the world of disabilities.
In education, it's been a really big deal. As a parent during COVID, when I was homeschooling my kindergartner, my first child to go to school, they used a lot of this extended reality work where you could be in a room with all of your other peers and learning in a classroom. And I just think that is really, really cool. And your examples of we're a global company and the opportunity to be able to merge and feel like you're working alongside one another is something that we are experimenting with. And I think that there's just so much possibility from collaborating. And then my final point, I think, is this is just a decentralization of creativity and the market and the economy. We can all see online how many people are so creative, and before, the ability to share that was really gate kept, and like the internet and the metaverse are really providing opportunities for people that would never have visibility before, from influencers to designers, and that is really cool.
It is. Imagine you're probably sitting on so many amazing, such amazing talent that again, we can tap into them. They can work simultaneously with other people from around the world, and it doesn't matter the limitations that they may have physically speaking, etc. And so I want to kind of get into kind of how I got into this, and then I'm going to show some quick examples and we'll wrap up. So let me kind of take a look. And again, I started talking about this work. I myself am dyslexic. I had a TED Talk where I talk about artificial intelligence a few years ago, and how can we use technology to help people get the best of themselves out there. And when I think about that, imagine being able to use technologies to help people, to do good, right? And this is what we're talking about at that point. And this is something that can be done from around the world. And then I've been just kind of featured in different articles. We were featured with NFTY Collective in Vogue magazine most recently, but as well on PC Magazine, different features, Forbes, Yahoo, different things, because we're spreading this message, and big companies with their platforms that are creating technology, this is the key to me. They're leaning in and they're like, yes, how can we make our technology more inclusive? And so we've been working with some bigger brands and partnering up with them to create these experiences. We have a game, for example, that's going to come out on Sandbox, which is one of the major metaverse spaces. And for the first time, they're going to have us on there, which is a Paralympian game where people are going to learn about different people with disabilities, and they're going to be able to play sports activities and things like that in the Sandbox. We partner with Adobe, and we're doing a virtual art gallery where people can learn also. And we're trying to make it very accessible so that if you're blind or you have, low vision, you'll still be able to enjoy with other features that we have available. We're partnering up with Instagram and different Snap, and being able to do filters and game experiences that are also accessible. You can blink and control the game if you don't have use of your hands. or you can use your voice to be able to dictate the game. And so those are all kinds of things that we're doing and seeking funding for at the moment. Okay, just to wrap up, because I want to make sure we have time. What you're seeing on the screen, Snoop Dogg was one of the first artists and like celebrities to have space in the sandbox. He had his avatar, and then you could be Snoop Dogg if you wanted. You could be an animal or like, a monster, but you couldn't show up as yourself. That's our avatar on the far right, without arms, without legs. Like this is kind of like you don't have to hide. You have choice to show up as yourself with your disability. So we created this to be able to give access and choice to people in these spaces. We've done everything from creating immersive experiences where we've designed concepts for virtual reality. This is kind of how you design those concepts. You scale it to a human. And then this is how people saw our avatar in Viva Tech that I mentioned to you. And then, we've done different experiences that I already mentioned, which I won't go into detail here. So like this is the spatial Metaverse environment. We also have augmented reality experiences where you can kind of interact with these characters. And finally, we've done things like mixed experiences where you could take a physical card, a postcard that we created, scan it, and then you will see like it pop up on your mobile device where you'll see these characters pop up. You'll learn about NFTY Collective. And if you cannot see, we've made it accessible so that you can hear with sound effects, with audio descriptions, exactly what's going on in this scene. So we also want to be accessible that way. So that's kind of who we are in a nutshell and what we've been doing. And thank you so much for letting me share that. And I do want to encourage for everybody listening too, I hope that you're taking away, like think about physical experiences that you engage your clients with. How can you make that digital? How can you make that more accessible? Do you bring people into the room that have disabilities today and ask them to test your products, your services? Are you ensuring to partner up with advisory groups on accessibility to ensure that people can access whatever it is that you're providing? So these are all kind of ways and tips that I want to share with the audience as well. As you go back to your workplaces, how can you think about people with disabilities? How can you merge technology to be more accessible? And these are different ways to do that. So thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, no, well, thank you so much. That's so much information. And I loved this. Like I said, I saw you, she was a keynote speaker at the Knowability Conference here in Austin, and I live in Austin. And so I was there. And this was such an incredible presentation. So thank you for coming and doing it here, especially for July is for Allies. As Giselle mentioned, really talking about like allyship and how we can be like more thoughtful in the way we create spaces across the board. One of the things that I did have a question that came up in the chat, someone mentioned, they said, going deeper in Metaverse is very cool, but how the needed devices for that technology could be more affordable to most of the people.
Yes.
What are
Great
your thoughts
question.
on that?
Absolutely. I can't agree more. I think one of the ways to be accessible is to bring the price point down. In fact, I can give a whole talk. There's so much that goes into these conversations and really great minds that are going into the considerations, like who can afford a headset to get into virtual reality? And at the beginning, they were being sold for anywhere between like $300 to $600 a set. Like who affords that? And so you already limit who has access to it. Not only the affordability, but then you think about like sometimes people with certain, whatever it may be, it can give you motion sickness to have that on, or maybe you cannot see, so you're totally outside of that experience, right? So it's all about finding ways to bring the price point down, be more sustainable, think about from an economic standpoint, how do we create these experiences where we don't have to make it so at such a high price point so more people can access it. I've heard of schools, and groups donating, things to certain areas that give access to people. And you talked about democratizing earlier when you opened up, Wendy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to be able to kind of like these platform owners, they're making so much money on so many other things. They can donate, to groups. They can bring their price points down and maybe make it, the technology in a universal way where it doesn't have to be that, if you only get the $600 set, this is the experience you get. Like think about maybe other price points and things like that. So all of that I would say goes into that. That's a wonderful question.
Well, I was going to say too, one of the things that you were mentioning about doing a lot of these collaborative partnerships, at the end of the day, organizations and corporations need people to buy whatever their wares and services are. So the ability to be able to bring people to the table, if the medium is going to be through like virtual reality devices, they will find a way. And I think it's also to your point, you know, as an organization, we're a very large tech company, and like through our BMC Cares program and the social impact department that I'm over, one of the things that we've done, for example, is we've donated headsets to like the National Health Institute outside of London for healthcare workers, for them to have a wellness room so that they could, you know, especially during COVID, a lot of people couldn't leave the hospital. They were very burnt out. Like there were high incidences like PTSD and depression. And so the ability to make a wellness room for healthcare workers where they could just like sit in a room and put a headset on and do meditation and like look at the ocean or whatnot that would make them more relaxed was something. It's like these small little ways that we can be like more intentional. And you brought up something about our you know, like accessibility and testing them for all of our BMCers and our BMC ecosystem. Mark Fries, who is our AVP of web marketing, he and his team have done a really great job of working on making our external websites more accessible. One of the things that we do actually, as we update our websites and an iterative process, is we do have people test them with disabilities to be able to make sure that we are providing and making it as accessible as possible. Because not only is it the right thing to do, but it's a regulation. You are required to do it. And not only because you were required to do it, I feel like it spurs innovation, you know, the ability to think outside the box. You know, we're making things more accessible. We're low coding our products so that way they can be, you know, more sustainable. And I know that from our developer standpoint, they're really excited about learning these new ways to develop and code and make what their work more accessible to everyone in the world. So
two quick things on that point. A lot of the technology that we use today, a lot of it was actually stemmed from people with disabilities, because the need for that, like Siri was actually something that was made because people who couldn't use the keyboard wanted to be able to use their voice instead. And so that was a technology there. And we use Siri all the time now, like and not just Siri, but like any kind of voice activated AI that's helping us to kind of do things. And that stems from that. And then when you even design with like people who speak a different language, you know how we look at apps in the United States or in English speaking context, we look at mobile apps and we read from left to right. Sometimes people read from right to left because of their language, Hebrew, Arabic, etc. When you think from that concept, you can also think, you know what, some people are left-handed users and they might want to see the screen inverted from what people from left to right would see it. And so same thing from someone who's dyslexic like me, I would prefer sometimes to be able to click on something on the other side, like a left-handed user would do. And so sometimes when we design with certain people in mind, it just becomes like this global context that we can apply to many things. And so, yeah, not that far off.
Well, I have another question that's come in. This is fantastic. Any tips on changing people's mindset, those who have a very set way of thinking? And I don't know, there's no more context to that question, but certainly in the work that you and I do, this is a question that we get asked often that has, you know, practical ways on that. So please share.
Yeah. You know what? I'm the person who asked that question. I ask myself that question on a daily basis. This is a question that I always go back to. How can I, especially in a world today in 2023, where we polarize and politicize anything that has to do with like inclusion and diversity and equity. And it's like, it's becoming something that's less about humanity and trying to like really design with humanity in mind and more about like some kind of polarizing topics. It's kind of warping what it's all about. So I would say as much as you can, what I've done, and I think Wendy, you might do this too, data is key. Always use data to be able to prove a point. Why does this matter to the business? Why does this matter to this individual? How is this going to make your life easier? By the way, when we market and we design products with more people in mind, there are over 1 billion people in the world who have some sort of a disability. And that's grown with the pandemic because people now have more chronic illnesses and things that, you know, came because of COVID. Now, and people age and you acquire certain disabilities over time. You know, you probably didn't use glasses before and now you use glasses, or maybe you need a mobility device at some point in your life. That happens. And so with that, how do you design products with all people in mind and people with disabilities? The more you do that, the more you spread your market share. And so the more it's going to affect revenue, the more it's going to affect opportunities for your business. So look at it that way. Bring the data and the facts, and also check out what your competition is doing. I bet you your competition is maybe kind of moving in directions that are more inclusive, and you should stay ahead of the competition, or at least on par with them. So I would say that. Always bring the facts, whoever asked that question.
Always bring the facts. Also, too, we are ahead of our competition, FYI, but
Go ahead.
but anyway, I agree, like to your point with the providing data, one of the first things I did when I came here was we talked about the business imperative of ESG, diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability. It's no longer a nice to have. It is a massive factor in the buying process of our
Yes.
clients. And on top of it, it's a massive factor in the human capital and talent that we attract, which as a tech company is our highest materiality risk, human capital, technology. We have to have the best people to make the best products, to be the best in the market, and to sell those products. And so it all comes full circle. And I know from my experience when I have, my Yelpers or naysayers around some of the things that we might do, we really bring it back to the bottom line. This is a business imperative. This is what our client, it's the right thing to do, but also our clients demand it. So at the end of the day, that is what it is. So thank you so much for sharing. I see we have another question in the chat. As developers, we know that it's very important, the inclusion in technology, and for sure it's a big step for our future, the metaverse and all this environment. Will this project be open source to remain sustainable?
Right now, our project is kind of like we're seeking funding at the moment to be able to kind of bring forth these experiences, and it can develop into being open source at some point once we're able to get to that point. We haven't gotten that far. So I would say, yeah, totally. It can be, because we want to spread education. We want to spread awareness and education for other people to emulate this, what we've learned, what we've done, what works, and then like spread it on. So yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for sharing that.
Are there any resources that you could share for developers that might want to learn more about? We've done some work with our developers around like web accessibility, from just a WCAG, baseline. And then we've also done work around like inclusive language and our release notes and, all of our documentation that we put out there. But maybe a follow-up that I could send to the audience are suggestions. I know you mentioned Sandbox. I wonder if they have like any kind of like test units or rooms where people are sharing content.
Yeah, I wonder that too. And I think we're actually working with them, because we've brought up, with all these platform providers that I mentioned before and others, we've brought up ways in which they can be more accessible, right? And so we're actually working with them. So yes, a few resources. Check out Microsoft. Microsoft has this whole guide that they put out on inclusive design. So if you just Google Microsoft inclusive design, you will see this wonderful resource that they put together that gives really good tips to developers, to coders, to people, and just kind of like product teams and UX on how to create more with more inclusion in mind. Another great one is Salesforce. Salesforce has this entire free course on like inclusive design, and really good information out there. I'd say just sign up to their courses, and you can learn like what they've gone through in their journey and how to apply that. And the last one I'll share is Google. Google has a lot of documentation that they've created for free for like coding, UX design, all the things around inclusive design as well. And really great resources from everything on how to use inclusive design, even when you're coding, replacing old language that's outdated and not really even descriptive. Instead of like master and slave, what are you really trying to say when you're coding? And so how to replace that, how to manage that. So those are three really great like resources that you could spend. It's like if you come out from like a college course after you're, taking those. So, and they're all free.
Yeah, and like the inclusive language that you just meant, we're actually a part of the Inclusive Naming Initiative, which is all about like replacing harmful language within like open source code. And then we also apply that internally to our own documentation and release notes and do consistent training on it, which Alicia, our friend Alicia, she actually came in and talked about microaggressions for a diversity speaker series. And we delved into that a lot because it is extremely important. Like all these factors really make a huge difference in the work that we do to advance and leverage technology. So Giselle, tell me, like, what's next? How are you applying this? I know you're working with big clients, but as you're advising other clients in your other realms of your life, like, what are you hearing from the market in terms of where this is going, what we should be thinking about here at BMC, and how we can be better allies to the disability, like the community, the disability community?
Yeah. One of the things that happens within the disability community is that they have this saying, and it's like, nothing for us without us. And what we're seeing is, although companies sometimes, because there's lawsuits at play, there's like all these risks, if you don't design with like disability inclusion in mind, and especially accessibility, a lot of companies often do the bare minimum. To be honest, they just want to like follow a checklist and just say, okay, yeah, we're good, we're accessible now. And I say, do more. Bring in people who actually have disabilities, and not just to test like on the accessibility side, but like also to gather information, to be a part of your research initiatives, to, you may be working on something that you think has nothing to do with accessibility or people with disabilities. And, by having them in the room and having their perspective on it, you probably will gain a lot more, innovation and ideas on how you can expand what you were thinking about. So that's one thing that I'm seeing. Also, pay attention to legislation is another tip I'll give. We've seen everything from like, now there's legislation on if you're doing anything with like virtual reality, you have to pass these certain guidelines with accessibility before you're even allowed to go to market anymore, because that was a big issue. And so there's a lot of bills that have been passed. There's a lot of things that have gone, to just kind of like bigger legislation in the United States, especially, and globally, around people with disabilities and how we need to be thinking about them. So I'd say pay attention to that. And there's this group, if you're interested particularly in what we've talked about today, when it comes to like the metaverse and what I call basically spatial computing. All these things fall under spatial computing. There's associations, I believe, one of them is, the name is escaping me right now, but I'll have to find it. But you can Google it as well. And it's an association on all things like metaverse and spatial computing. And they gather together organizations like Google's and Amazon's, and like all these different big organizations are on this association. And they're thinking about like, how do you make everything more inclusive and accessible when it comes to the metaverse and spatial computing. So just check that out as well, kind of do some research and find out like where can you kind of plug into the voices and what they're thinking about, so that you can also be in alignment with what those companies are doing.
Yeah, and this sounds like this sounds like a great opportunity too. We use our employee resource groups. We have 10 employee resource groups. Access Abilities is our employee resource group dedicated to people with disabilities or people that have family in their lives that disabilities. And we do bounce ideas definitely from that group, and we have them plugged in with our web accessibility team as well. But I definitely love those ideas. Okay, we have some more questions, Giselle. First off, Hannah said, thank you so much for the resources. I'm excited to see how we can implement those supports on our enablement team as well. And then Augustine, they want to know, what does NFTY stand for?
All right, cool. So I was gonna I just shared it in the chat with the host and the panelists. I don't know if it goes to everyone.
The association, I'll send it. Yeah, the association is called XRA. Got it.
Yes, because, okay, so check that out. That's a really good resource. NFTY Collective stands for, NFTY really, we did a play on NFTs, but really it's about like the word nifty. Nifty means to be skillful, to be like amazing. And we wanted to highlight people from around the world with disabilities and show this is not something that you need to like have pity for or feel that that's not even what people with disabilities want when you sit down and talk to them. They want to be seen for their skills, for their amazingness. We have athletes, that Paralympians. We have, Lex Gillette, a U.S. Paralympic long jumper who has won several awards for the United States Olympic team, and he's part of our collective. Tiffany Yu is a speaker and an advocate, an Asian American who's doing amazing things in the disability space. We have singers, actors, Stephen Wei, who is on a show on Hulu. He's an actor and a comedian. These are not people who are just sitting around doing nothing. They're pretty nifty. So the way we wanted to kind of like represent them was through that name. Did I answer the full question? Did I miss something?
I think you did. You definitely answered the question. I love NFTY. First off, I had not heard until you told me about this. I hadn't heard NFTY in a long time, but it was very popular in the 80s. You refer to something being exactly what you just described. Okay, and then because it's 110 degrees where I am, and I know NFTY Collective has a thing about ice cream. Can you tell us about your ice cream thing?
So the ice cream theme is so random and it's just fun. It's like one of those things that we bring in because it's just like, who doesn't like ice cream? And by the way, ice cream is so inclusive too, because if you're dairy free, there's an option for you. Like there's so many different flavors you could get into. You can do all the things. It's fun. It's approachable. And we brought that into this because we're like, it's just a cute part of what we're doing. And we wanted to say, like, look, just like ice cream, like technology should be inclusive too, and it's fun and it can be approachable. So that was what we did. It's just kind of a fun random thing.
I love that. Well, I don't have any more questions. And, personally, I love you and adore you. And thank you so much for coming and doing this and talking to all of us about how we can be more inclusive, especially as we are a tech company. BMC software is really in everything and in every organization. And we have such an opportunity. I know we're driving a lot of change now, but we have so much opportunity to do more. So I hope that everyone on the call had a chance to learn something, take something away. This really was relevant to everyone. Please make sure you follow NFTY Collective on Instagram and LinkedIn. Follow Giselle. She has a really great LinkedIn where she shares a lot of content and resources. Continue to be an ally, and thank you all. So, oh wait, I think I have some more questions. Sorry, I was about to wrap it up. Let me see. Okay, fabulous call. Thank you. They were just saying how wonderful we are. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. But thank you all so much for being here today. When you show up, it means the world. Allyship is a lifelong journey. It takes work, and I appreciate everyone who came today. Giselle, do you have any parting words?
Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone. First of all, give you kudos for even making this call. It shows that you care about this. And I just want to encourage you whatever you're doing work-wise, whatever you go touch back on, when you go to your desk and you work, put on the lens of inclusion. That's all. Think about, who am I leaving out? Ask yourself that one question. Who am I potentially leaving out? Or who is this experience potentially leaving out? And how can we do better to expand what we're doing? And when you design that way, when you work that way, when you approach that way, you'll be amazed at like how much more expensive whatever you're doing can be. So thank you all.
Thank you. All right, everyone, be well, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, stay hydrated, and we'll see you next month for our next diversity speaker series. Bye now.
Stay hydrated.